Most people do and survive their spiritual awakening, not because it kills them, but because it unears something so raw, so real, so untamed that the personality they've spent a lifetime building shatters. They retreat. They numb. They return to the dream. Because truth, real truth, doesn't free you first. It breaks you. It breaks. The illusions you will rip, the stories you clung to, the masks you wore so long they became your skin. This is the part no one talks about, the part left out of every romanticized version of enlightenment. The screaming silence, the psychic death, the soul quake that leaves you trembling in a world that no longer makes sense. You are told that awakening is light, but that is only half the truth. The other half lives in shadow, and the moment you see through the veil, the world begins to dissolve, not physically, but existentially. The meaning you assign to everything collapses. Who you thought you were collapses. Your beliefs, your gods, your goals suddenly become hollow echoes in a chamber. You can no longer live inside. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Because awakening doesn't arrive as comfort. It arrives as crisis. It begins the moment the life you've built starts to feel like a lie, not a malicious lie, but a necessary one, a scaffolding to protect you from truths you weren't ready to face, but now you re-ready, or at least something inside you is something ancient, something buried, something sacred, and wild and irreversibly alive. And that something will not let you sleep again, not in the same way. The dreams you once chased now feel foreign. The people you once resonated with feel distant. The pleasures you once craved now leave you empty, and you re-left with silence, a silence so loud it drowns out the voice you once called me. This is ego death, not a metaphor, a real psychological death of identity. And if you resist it, it will hurt more. If you fight it, it will feel like madness. If you surrender, it will still tear you apart, but in the tearing, you will glimpse something eternal. This is why most people do and survive it, because the old self doesn't go quietly. It screams, it clings, it bargains, it tells you that what you re-feeling isn't real, that you re-depressed, delusional, lost. And maybe you are, but only because the map you were given was never meant to lead you to yourself. You were taught how to succeed, how to conform, how to fit in, but never how to be real, never how to descend, never how to fall inward and listen to the soul beneath the persona. And so the descent feels like destruction. But in truth, it is a sacred invitation, an initiation, a spiral down into the womb of your own becoming. You will be asked to let go of everything that isn't real, every label, every mask, every borrowed identity. You will lose things, you will lose people, you will lose versions of yourself you swore were permanent. And you must let them go, because if you hold on, if you try to drag them into the new frequency, they will rot in your hands. You see, awakening doesn't give you a better version of your old life. It burns the old life to the ground and waits in the ashes to see what, if anything, dares to rise. And still most people turn back. They choose comfort over truth. They choose applause over authenticity. They choose the known cage over the unknown wilderness, because the wilderness is terrifying. It speaks a language the rational mind can't translate. It asks you to feel, to stay, to hold your gaze when the mirror shows you what you tried to forget. It shows you your shadow, not as an enemy, but as a long-lost part of you begging to come home. The part that raged, the part that cried, the part that manipulated, fear controlled, the part that didn't get love, and so learned to survive without it. And now, to awaken fully, you must invite that part to the table. You must sit with your shadow and offer it something stronger than fear, compassion. But this is no small task, because the shadow doesn't speak kindly. It speaks in triggers, in projections, in pain. It shows up in the way you sabotage what you most want. It lives in your jealousy, your defensiveness, your addictions, and until you turn toward it, you will stay trapped in the loop. This is what most people do. Understand awakening is not the end of suffering. It is the beginning of facing it consciously, honestly, radically. And that is why so few make it through, because awakening asks everything of you. It asks for your grief. It asks for your rage. It asks for your silence. It asks for your willingness to be reborn with no promise of who you become. It asks you to die while still breathing, to lose your mind, to find your soul, to watch the scaffolding collapse, and say yes anyway. And in that yes, everything begins to descend. doesn't ask for your strength. It asks for your surrender. And that is what terrifies the ego most, because the ego was built on control, perception, control story. It was crafted to survive in a world that punishes. Vulnerability, but the soul doesn't care about survival. The soul came here to become. And becoming requires unmaking. You must unmake the armor unmake. The stories unmake the scaffolding that told you who to be. Only then can something true emerge, not built from fear, but from essence. And that essence does not shout it, does not demand. It waits for the noise to die down, for the masks to slip, for the mind to exhaust itself with its own games. Then it whispers not in words, but in ache, a deep, unmistakable ache for something more, not more success, not more approval, more real, more whole, more alive. This ache is not a mistake. It is not depression. It is not dysfunction. It is the call, the sacred signal that you are ready to leave the lie behind, but hear as the truth. Most people hear the call and pretend it's nothing. They silence it with achievement. They drown it with distraction. They medicate it with routine, because to answer the call means losing the world you built on sand, and no one warns you how lonely that is. The first stage of awakening isn't beauty. It's exile. Exile from the familiar, exile from the socially acceptable self, exile from the matrix of validation you didn't even know you lived inside. And in that exile, you will want to go back. You will crave the numbness, the predictability, the comfort of pretending, but something in you won't let you not anymore, because once you've glimpsed truth, you can't unknow it. Once you felt the weight of your own soul, you can't return to the surface. And so you wander through nights without sleep, through mornings filled with tears you can't explain, through relationships that begin to feel hollow, even when no one did anything wrong. This is the space between cells, the cocoon, the void, the liminal zone where everything old has died and nothing new has yet taken root. It is terrifying. It is sacred. And it is where the soul does its deepest work. Here, the shadow comes closer, no longer content to be denied. It shows itself in every trigger, every reaction, every unhealed wound rising to the surface like a scream from the deep. And you want to run, of course. You were taught to run from pain, to fix it, to spiritualize it, to override it with affirmations and positive thoughts. But awakening is not a bypass. It is a confrontation. It is an unflinching look into the mirror of your own fragmentation. You are not asked to escape the pain. You are asked to meet it, to sit with it, to let it teach you what comfort never could. And slowly you begin to see the pain was never the enemy. It was the doorway, the crack in the shell, the fault line. Where the light could enter, you begin to see that the anger, the sadness, the fear, they were never broken pieces. They were buried messengers, each carrying a fragment of your truth. And as you listen, you soften. You begin to feel something you haven't felt in years. Maybe ever compassion, not just for others, for yourself, for the child in you who was never held, for the teenager who built armor just to survive, for the adult who confused productivity for purpose. You see it now, all of it, with tenderness, with the kind of grace that can only rise from the ashes of self-abandonment. And in that grace, something shifts. You stop needing to perform. You stop needing to be perfect. You stop needing to be healed. You begin to realize that awakening wasn't about becoming better. It was about becoming honest. Honest about the mess. Honest about the beauty. Honest about the paradox of being human, divine, and terrified, eternal and breaking, limitless and wounded. And somehow that honesty becomes the ground you stand on, not confidence, not certainty, but truth. You no longer need to convince anyone of who you are. You no longer need to belong in places that shrink your light. You no longer need to sacrifice your truth to feel safe, because now you understand you are the safety, not because you have it all figured out, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself in the places that hurt the most. You've stopped running, and that is everything. That is what most people never reach, not because they weak, but because they were never shown how to stay in discomfort, to stay in the unknown, to stay with the soul long enough for it to speak. But you are staying, and because you re-staying, you will become something real. Not polished, not perfect, but rooted, aligned, unshakably alive. And that is the beginning of becoming unbreakable. You begin to see how much of your life was built on borrowed dreams, dreams you never chose. They were chosen for you by culture, by fear, by generations who didn't know what wholeness looked like, only what survival demanded, and survival demands that you shrink, demands that you wear a mask, that you trade your soul for approval, that you bury your needs, your truth, your hunger beneath a smile that doesn't reach your eyes, but you not surviving anymore, you reawakening. And with that awakening comes a sacred rage, a deep, thunderous, holy anger at the lie, at the roles you played, at the ways you betrayed yourself just to be accepted. And that rage is not a regression. It is a resurrection. It's the part of you that remembers. I was never meant to live asleep. You begin to speak differently, not louder but clearer. You say no without guilt. You say yes without over-explaining. You stop apologizing for being whole, and the world doesn't know what to do with this version of you. The world trained you to fit in, to behave, to blend. But now you a frequency it can't predict now. You a truth it can't distort. Now you a presence that reveals the unconscious in others simply by existing. This is the power of embodiment, not talking about awakening, not posting about healing, but living it, breathing it, becoming it in every unguarded moment. And it's not glamorous. It's not always poetic sometimes. It looks like crying in your car because your nervous system is rewriting itself. Sometimes it looks like losing people you thought were forever, because your truth became too loud for their silence. Sometimes it's grieving a life you built with love, because you built it from a version of you that no longer exists. This is the cost of becoming you do on. Just lose illusions, you lose identities, you lose comfort, you lose the scaffolding that once held you together and now holds you back, and what replaces it is unimmediate. It is and certain it is and clean it. Es a void of vast holy emptiness where the old no longer belongs and the new hasn't yet formed. You wake up and don't know who you are. You walk through the world feeling both ancient and newborn. You try to speak, and language feels too small. You try to plan, and the future laughs. Because this space is ain't for building. It's for listening to the whisper beneath the noise. The whisper that says, let go. Let go of the timeline. Let go of the blueprint. Let go of the need to know what this all means. Let it shape you. Let it strip you. Let it show you what remains when nothing is left to protect. And what remains is real, not your persona, not your performance, not the curated identity you kept polishing like armor. What remains is breath presence, the deep pulse of being alive without needing to prove it. And in that space you meet yourself, not the self you hope to be, but the one who is always winging, the wild one, the wounded one, the one who remembers why you came here before the world taught you to forget. You don't need to chase your purpose anymore. You become it in how you move, and how you speak, and how you stay soft when life demands you harden. You stop reaching for meaning like a ladder. You begin to embody meaning as a way of walking, a way of loving, a way of not abandoning your soul when the world goes dark. This is the deeper phase of awakening. The phase no one prepares you for, not because it's hidden, but because it cannot be taught. It can only be lived. It's not a destination. It is not a mountaintop moment. It is a rhythm, a return, a remembering of the self behind the shadow, the self before, the conditioning, the self beyond the story. And when you begin to live from that place, not just visit, but truly live, everything changes. Not instantly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Your life becomes quieter. But fully, you stop explaining yourself to those who never truly listen. You stop outsourcing your intuition to experts and systems. You stop betraying your inner knowing just to be liked. and something unexpected happens. You stop striving for love because you realize you are it you were always looking for, not in the mirror, not in their eyes, not in the future, but here now within. And you begin to trust that the life aligned with your truth will reveal itself in time, that what falls away was never yours, that what stays will meet you on this deeper frequency. You no longer rush your becoming, you no longer beg for clarity. You no longer fear the unknown, because now the unknown feels like home. There is a different kind of strength born from surviving the soul's collapse. It's not loud, it doesn't flex, it does and shine in the way the world teaches you to measure power. It is quiet, it is sovereign. It is the strength of someone who knows who they are without needing to be seen. Because once you've died to everything that is unreal, what remains is unshakable. Not because it can break, but because it is broken. And returned in deeper form, you don't walk through life anymore looking for proof that you matter. You walk as proof, not to the world, to your own soul, to the part of you that remembers what it costs to reclaim your voice, to walk alone, to burn the lie in order to feel real again. This kind of strength isn't built overnight. It's forged in fire and the tremble before the truth in the nights. You thought you wouldn't survive, and now there is no need to survive. Now there is only the truth. You live simpler now, not because life is easier, but because you no longer waste energy trying to be what you read not. You no longer build relationships out of fear of being alone. You no longer sell your time for praise. You no longer dilute your depth for acceptance. You then met yourself too deeply to pretend again, and what once felt like a curse, the exile, the unraveling, the silence, now feels like grace, because it brought you here to this stillness, to this truth, to this inner sanctuary that nothing outside of you can ever give or take. Away you watch others now as they run. Perform ache for belonging, chase, meaning like shadows, and you do'n't judge. Because you were there, because you still carry the scar, but you also carry the light, not the kind that blinds, the kind that beckons, the kind that says you real loud to stop running. Now you real loud to feel, you real loud to come home to yourself, and some they will see in you what they've been dying to remember in themselves, and some will end. And that is okay, because you no longer need to wake others up. You simply need to stay awake, stay grounded, stay open, stay real. This is the quiet revolution, not to fight the system, but to no longer feed it with your energy, not to preach change, but to embody what can no longer be denied. Your very presence becomes a mirror, not one that flatters, one that reflects, and some will shatter before it, others will awaken, but your job is to manage their reflection. Your job is to remain the mirror, to remain the clarity, to remain the fire. This is how spiritual awakening becomes power, not through performance, but through permanence. You become what cannot be moved, because you no longer live from surface. You live from source, from the self that was never lost, only forgotten. And now you remember how to rest without guilt. You remember how to feel without shame. You remember how to speak without shrinking. You remember how to walk through the world without explaining yourself. Because your existence is no longer a question. It is an answer. You no longer ask, who am I supposed to be? You whisper, I already am. And that is the final threshold, not becoming more, but becoming you, all of you, the holy, the messy, the divine, the broken, the healed, the unhealed, the becoming all that finally allowed. You are no longer trying to escape the human experience. You are here to inhabit it fully, consciously, boldly. And this is why you survived your spiritual awakening, not because you mastered it, not because you transcended it, but because you stayed in the fire. You stayed when it broke you. You stayed when it emptied. You, and in that staying, you were reborn, not into someone better, into someone true. And now you carry something unspoken, a frequency, a remembering, a light, not a performance, but a presence. And you walk through the world not seeking the next awakening, but living as they awaken. This is what most never reach, not because they can, but because they turn back too soon. You didn't. You turned inward. You turned toward. You turned into yourself and found home. So now walk not to chase, but to radiate, not to prove, but to be, and let the world feel what can only be felt in the presence of someone who has touched the fire and did not run.